Warhammer Network. Frederick the Great, Master of Destiny.
Welcome to the Art of Wargaming on the Earworm Network. I am Yogamalark.
And I'm Thumbs.
And we are coming to you today for the last section of Frederick the Great. I am bummed that we are going to be... I'm excited to be moving on to other material, of course. It's one of the fun things in any scholarly pursuit is when you're able to move on to the next subject and immerse yourself in new material. But it's also kind of sad when you get really attached to a particular author or a particular idea, and you're like, man, like... It's like going to a theme park, and you're like, I know I have to go and leave this theme park eventually, but I just want to ride the roller coaster one more time.
Okay, so first of all, you and I have very different relationships with theme parks.
Fair enough.
Now, I know this one is, as I've been calling him, your dead guy boyfriend.
Yeah.
You're a huge Freddy fan. I liked him better than I liked Machiavelli. I think I liked Sun Tzu better than I like Frederick.
I mean, Sun Tzu's material is incredibly accessible. The simplicity with which Sun Tzu writes and the directness with which Sun Tzu writes means... I mean, there's a reason why his work is one of the longest surviving works on the subject and why people continue to consult. It's so good. It's so applicable to so many different situations, and it's hard to discount Sun Tzu for sure. I just like Frederick because he's Freddie Mercury of this current era. I mean, he was unapologetic about who he was. He was bombastic. He had his own style, and it worked. And it was beautiful. It was just a beautiful thing.
Plus, I could see Freddie Mercury wearing a hussar coat if he wanted to. Like
he could pull it off.
Awesome.
He could pull it off. So I want to address something real quick. You guys might be hearing something on my feed today, like a hum, a rush, like a vibration. There is some heavy equipment being operated outside of my recording studio at the moment. They're doing some construction on the road. So if you hear a strange noise in the back of my sound, that's where that's coming from. And I apologize for that. We're going to do what we can to filter it out in the editing process, but it's just what it is today. So we appreciate you guys being patient and dealing with that as we are trying to be patient and deal with that as well. Now, those of you who follow the Instagram and the Facebook will maybe have seen a picture. Now, by the time this episode comes out, it will have been kind of old news, as it were. But I got the Indomitus box. I was one of the first people to walk in and pick it up out of the store here in Missoula, Montana. I was very thrilled about that fact. And of course, I got home and started reading the book straight away. So this is day 3 of me studying the rule book. I am about to go over some of those rules for you Warhammer cats, some of the differences between 8th and 9th edition. First, I just want to nerd out a little bit about the box. It has some amazing stuff in it if you're a Primaris Marine player or just a Astartes player. There's some great close combat options that we have been kind of sorely lacking in the Astartes lists. I cannot wait to use them in my own list. I've got enough stuff to now just to play a completely Primaris list, and I am stoked for it.
Primaris are like the super soldiers, right?
Yes, the Primaris Marines are like Space Marines, but better. So Belisarius Cawl took the design of the Space Marine, was able to improve upon it. They have better armor, better weapons. Yeah, they're an improvement on an already pretty good design. So they're cool, but I split this box with my friend Juniper, who you guys will have heard in Season 1 of this show. She plays the Necrons, and this box made me want to start playing Necrons. They got some really cool stuff in this, but the Plasmancer especially I want to draw attention to. He's basically an out-of-control psyker that doesn't have to worry about some of the issues with psyching. So yeah, I could nerd out about this for a while, but I guess the point of the matter is it's very much well worth it. It's a great way to bring in the new edition, and I am really looking forward to playing some of these models in my own army. I'll let you guys know the ones I like the best, when we finally get around to actually being able to do that sort of thing. But real quick, I wanted to do a rundown of the 9th edition rules. So you guys who don't play Warhammer, this might not necessarily apply to you, but for those of us who do, it's quite important. Now, I understand that this is, again, going to be coming out 3 weeks after this book is dropped, but for anybody who hasn't been able to grab it, or perhaps if you just, it's been a busy summer for everybody. So if it perhaps slips your mind and you just...
We were asked specifically for this, too.
We were.
Like, I had people messaging me being like, are you going to talk about this? I'm like, well, I'm not, but I'm sure Malark will.
So yeah, I'm going to talk about it real quick, and I'm sorry that it's coming to you guys a little bit late. I'm sure other shows have talked about this ad nauseum, but we're just going to go over it real quick so that people kind of understand. It's very similar. If you've played 8th edition, it's very similar to 8th edition. So I'm not going to go over every rule in specific, just some of the big changes. Now, I've only had this book for 3 days. I have been taking meticulous notes, but I am also human. I miss things. So if there's something that I missed, that I didn't go over in my notes, please do not take this as gospel. Do not quote me during your next game saying, you know what, Malark said this was okay, or this is the rule that Malark said. So,
well, don't you know that you're the universal arbiter of how the rules work, Malark?
If that were the case, we'd be in trouble. We would all
be happy, though.
I'd be happy, but we'd be in trouble. My happiness would last for maybe 2 weeks before I realized that all of my decisions were wrong. So yeah, let's go through this real quick. By and large, it was a lot of rule refinement and specification. All of the beta stuff that we saw coming out at the end of 8th edition kind of got crystallized and finalized in 9th edition. And there's a lot of elimination of gotcha hammers. A lot of the phases are far more specifically defined so that certain things can't be glossed over. For instance, heroic interventions at the end of the charge phase used to be that if you just transitioned quickly from charge to fight phase and your opponent forgot to declare heroic interventions, that you just glossed over it. Now, your opponent has to actively say, I have no more heroic interventions, because it's part of the phase. You actually have to check with your opponent, make sure they don't have anything to this to do, and then you can move on to the fight phase. So I'm glad that they actually included some of that specificity in here, because while in my local group, like my local gaming group, we're pretty good. Like, we're very cordial people. We gave each other the benefit of the doubt most of the time, and not everybody's like that. So I'm glad to see that this is kind of being enforced in some way. Unit coherency is going to be enforced a lot stronger. You got a 2-inch horizontal distance between models, which is the same as last edition. 5 inches vertically. I can't remember exactly what it was for the last edition, but they're defining a lot of these things are going to be 5 inches vertically. You're going to hear that a lot. And if they're under 6 models, each model has to be in coherency with at least one other model. If there's more than 6 models in a unit, you have to be in coherency with 2 models. So no more stringing out large units across the field to occupy 2 objectives. Like, you have to have a really big unit in order to do that in this edition, which I think kind of makes sense. Again, like, a large unit draws its strength from that force of numbers, that weight, that press, of being able to look around and be like, okay, here are all my buddies. I guess I don't want to run away. But if you're all strung out as far as you can possibly be, what's going to keep you from turning tail and running? So I kind of like that. Engagement range, again, has been, you got that 1 inch around, and then a 5 inch vertical. I'm not sure if that was specifically defined that way in 8th, but it is in 9th. There's a new phase, the command phase, where you're going to be getting command points every single turn. I like this, because I'm a player where within like turn 2 or turn 3, I've already burned through all of my command points using stratagems, and I'm like, okay, well, the rest of the game, I guess I'm just relying on luck. That's cool. So this is fun. You're going to be getting command points every phase, or every turn. You get 1 just for having an army that is battle forged, and then a certain number based on whatever detachment your warlord is in. 2 for a patrol, 3 for a battalion, and 4 for a brigade. Nothing for anything else. So you're going to want to start taking those troop-oriented groups if you're not already doing that. And during this phase, you also resolve any command phase rules. So, for instance, the Necrons, they have the My Will Be Done rule. That is now resolved in the command phase. You're going to see a lot of these rules being resolved here. So it's just kind of a cleaning up of some of those other things, like the Canicles of the Omnissiah, the orders for the Astra Militarum. A lot of those things just being cleaned up and put into the command phase. Then we have the movement phase. They're including an actual option for remain stationary. You didn't have this in 8th edition, and I did see some people arguing that, like, if you really wanted to cheese the rules, you could define that every unit had to move, because not moving wasn't an option in the rule book. Even though that's kind of asinine and counterintuitive, it was the way some people argued it. Remain stationary is actually a thing you can select now, which is awesome. Again, that specificity, I like that. If you fall back, you can no longer manifest a psychic power unless you're Titanic. This makes sense. You can't fall back and shoot for the most part. And so falling back and making a psychic test, it didn't make sense. I absolutely abused that rule. I had a lot of units that I absolutely fell back and used that psychic thing to the best of my ability, but I understand why that's being taken away. And it looks now like flying units can no longer just fall back and shoot. I'm sure there's going to be specific units that are going to have the ability to do that, but as a general rule, flying units can no longer fall back and shoot. Transports, no longer moving after disembarking or charging. You are focused on getting out of that vehicle and then getting out in good order. You're not, no more moving around and charging and all that sort of thing. Shooting phase. Some cool additions in the rules here. Big guns never tire. Monsters and vehicles can still shoot at melee range as long as they're shooting at the things that are in melee range with them, and they're taking a -2 to those shots. But I like this. It means that you can't just run up and hug somebody's vehicle and be like, you know what, I can't do any damage to you, but you're not going anywhere for the rest of the game. You can at least now engage those dudes who are actively with you. Lookout Sir is a adjustment on the character targeting rule. You now cannot shoot at characters with 9 or less wounds while they're within 3 inches of friendly monsters, vehicles, or units of 3 or more models. So this is because it's kind of hard to pick out somebody in the maelstrom of combat. Everything's moving around. So if the character is sitting there near other things, you cannot target them. But, again, in 8th edition, I'd see people who have just a character sitting all by his onesie, away from everything in the backfield. And it's like, you're telling me that my highly trained Space Marine snipers can't see that lone dude standing by himself in a field.
Well, duh.
So I'm glad they kind of retconned that and made it a little bit more realistic, where again, if your leaders, your characters are near large groups or near vehicles, they're going to be masked by them, but otherwise, look out. And then blast. There's a blast type to weapons that's being applied to a whole host of weapons. Of course, grenades, missiles, plasma weaponry, a lot of other cool things are getting this blast template, and not template, but this blast rule. What it means is that versus a unit of 6 or more models, you get a minimum of 3 auto attacks. So if you've got for instance, a frag grenade that does D6 attacks, you get a minimum of 3 auto hits or auto attacks with that weapon against 6 or more models. 11 or more models, maximum auto attacks with that weapon. So that's pretty cool. I always wondered why it was that I could take a frag grenade, toss it into a group of 20 gene stealers, and not hit a single one of them. It was like, it's a frag grenade. Frag. It sends things, The
whole point of it is to do that.
Yeah. So this is, again, this makes a lot of those weapons, those explosive weapons, a bit more realistic, and I dig that. A couple more things for the shooting phase. Hit rolls can never be modified by more than -1 or +1. This eliminates that Eldar flyer list that makes everything at -3. No more. -3 becomes -1. So this is nice. This means that again, I've got a couple of lists that I'm going to have to tweak because they relied on a lot of modifiers. But this means that you can't cheese. Certain armies aren't going to be able to cheese in the same way. This rule also applies for wound rolls. A wound roll can never be modified by more than -1 or +1. And then unmodified hit rolls and wound rolls of 1 always miss. That's the same as 8th edition, but in this one, unmodified hit rolls and wound rolls of 6 always succeed. So that's cool. There's always a chance of success. There's always a reason to roll the dice at this point, which I like more than just, nope, it's you've been modified out, you can no longer hit, or, it's just too hard, you're never going to wound it. This is a nice thing to have. Charges. No longer will you be able to multi-charge and just pick and choose which one you want based on the distances. Now you have to be able to engage all targets of a multi-charge with that roll. So this means if you multi-charge something that's at 11 inches and something that's at 3 inches, and you roll a 6-inch charge, you can't go after either of them. So you're going to want to specify. You want to specify where you're going with your charges. And another big change of the charge phase is Overwatch now appears to be limited to a stratagem that everybody gets access to, and certain units, it sounds like, from what I was reading in the rules, it sounds like certain units are going to be able to get Overwatch as an ability. But for the most part, Overwatch is now just something that you have to plan for with those stratagems. So watch out for that. That's a big change for me. In the fight phase, so the base alteration, but previously whoever's turn it was, they would start. So after the charges and everything were done, it would start with whoever's turn it was, and then the other person would fight, and then back and forth. Now it begins with the players whose turn is not taking place. They get to start that base alteration after, of course, the charges and anything that has the will fight first always in the fight phase rule. Yeah, so that's a big one for the fight phase. I like that. I think that kind of balances things out a little bit more in the fight phase. Morale. An unmodified roll of 1 in the morale phase always succeeds. However, if you fail a morale check, it's not a matter of like you just start discarding models based on how much you fail. If you fail, 1 model flees, no matter how badly you fail, but every other model within that unit has to take a combat attrition test. So what that means is you roll a d6 for each remaining model, and on a 1 they flee. If that unit is below half strength, on a 1 or a 2 they flee. So this is kind of cool. I like this dynamic. I think it reflects more what actually happens in morale in battlefields. So that's kind of cool. Unit coherency is going to be huge here, by the way. If you're not maintaining your unit coherency, any model that is not within unit coherency is just taken off. They die. They're destroyed. So be sure when you're taking units off, when you're getting shot at or hacked apart, that you're doing this properly. And Thumbs is sitting here looking at me like, dude, I want to talk at some point. I'm sorry, Thumbs.
No, you're fine. I knew this was coming in.
I'm trying to get through this as quickly as possible. I understand there's a lot. So that was my first page of notes.
Oh, Jesus.
Second page of notes. Secondary objectives for match play. I like this. This was something that the ITC was doing already, but Games Workshop kind of caught on that it was a good idea. And now there are secondary objectives available for match play within this main rulebook. I dig that because it means that you can now adjust your idea of victory toward what your army can achieve, which is neat. But on the subject of battle-forged armies, this is going to be very different. Now, the actual detachments still are the same thing. You know, a brigade is still 3 to 5 HQ, 6 to 12 troops, so on and so forth, like it was an 8th. But the way it's done is slightly different. Command points are now gained at the very beginning based on army size. So let's say Thumbs and I are going to play a game. We agree that we want to play a 2,000 point game. That means that both of us start with 12 command points, period. That's just what it is. We're both getting 12 command points. And so you have to buy your detachments out of those command points. So like a brigade, for instance, I'm going to be using a brigade a lot because that's what I'm going to be gravitating toward, I'm pretty sure, in 9th edition. Because of the way that the rules are written, I'm fairly certain I'm just going to be trying to take 1 brigade each time, and that's it. So the army has a maximum number of detachments based on army size. That's kind of the same as it was in 8th. So each of them generate the same number of CP that they cost. So like a patrol costs 2, battalion costs 3, brigade costs 4, but each command phase, they will generate that same number of command points for you. So if I pay for a brigade in the beginning, I pay my 4 command points to get my brigade. Every command phase, I'm getting 5 command points. That's pretty sweet. I'm digging that idea. But reserves also cost command points now, and it's based on the combined power level of all the reserve units that are going up. So 1 through 9 cost 1 command point, 10 through 19 cost 2, 20 through 29 cost 3, so on and so forth. So that's kind of neat too. So now the command, like, you have to pay those command points for your reserves as well. And the way those reserves work is Battle Round 1, no strategic reserves can come in. Battle Round 2, strategic reserves must be set up wholly within 6 inches of the battlefield edge, but not the enemy edge or the deployment zone. The new maps define what the enemy edge is, but obviously you can't set them up in the 6 inches in the deployment zone here. Battle Round 3 and so on, they can be set up wholly within 6 inches of the battlefield edge, but still not on the enemy edge. So that's what it is for the rest of the game at that point. So that's a rather big alteration for the way that reserves are going to work. No longer can you just drop your dudes in the middle of the fight. Reserves have to come in from the sides, like reserves. And again, I'm sure that there's going to be specific units that they're going to get exceptions to this rule. Aircraft, for instance, get an exception to this rule. If an aircraft deep strikes or comes in as a reserve, they can be anywhere on the field. Another cool thing that aircraft have in 9th edition that I'm looking forward to having used against me, because let's face it, I don't have aircraft, is no longer when an aircraft moves off the edge of the board is it counted as destroyed. It now moves in strategic reserves, and your next turn you can bring it in like a strategic reserve. You don't have to pay command points for it, but it just flies off the board and then can come back because it's an airplane and can do those sorts of things. So I like that. Again, I don't have a whole lot of aircraft, but I think that reflects more, instead of just being boxed into a corner and being like, oh no, where will my airplane go? It can't possibly fly up.
Impossible. That's not how airplanes work, young man.
Impossible. So yeah, that's the big changes to Battleforged Armies reserves, and then whatever command points are left over. Let's say, so out of that 12 command points, I spend 4 on my battalion or on my brigade, and then I spend an additional 2 on putting dudes into strategic reserves. That means I start the game with 6 command points, right? So it balances things out. It's gonna make things a little bit more even between the armies. Lastly on this subject, and then we are going to move on, is terrain. Terrain is now far more defined. In 8th edition, it was kind of hard to be able to tell what rules to use for specific terrain. They have done away with all that ambiguity, and now we have very specific rules for how terrain is going to work. I'm not going to go into specific detail too much, but for instance, you've got hills, obstacles, area terrain, and buildings all being defined, and then each of those types of terrain have keywords that describe certain rules. So for instance, defensible is a new type of terrain. Infantry can either hold steady or set to defend when they are charged on defensible terrain. Hold steady means that you overwatch in a 5-up rather than a 6-up, and set to defend means you get a +1 to hit in that fight phase. So that's kind of cool. Certain types of terrain are going to be defensible, so you're going to be able to kind of hunker down and hold on to them a little bit easier. Another new one is exposed. So for instance, like an armored container of some sort is exposed. Therefore, it does not give cover if you're directly on top of it, which makes sense. You're exposed up there. It's not covering you. You're just standing on top of something being like, look at me, I'm over here. So those are just some examples of what the terrain is. And again, I encourage you to pick up the book. Obviously, 9th edition is the new thing, so as soon as you can, pick up this book, start studying what these mean. I like the new terrain stuff because, again, it takes away a lot of that doubt as to what the specific rules were for anything that's on the board. That's 9th edition in a very quick nutshell. Again, I've only been looking at the book for 3 days. I'm sure in another week I'm going to be like, oh, I should have included this or that or the other thing. But yeah, that's 9th edition. Those are the big changes for 9th edition. So I'm looking forward to playing it as soon as it's safe to do so. But I'm going to try to get brushed up on those rules so I know what I'm doing. Talking about moving on, the next episode you're going to hear from us after this is we're going to be talking about 2 Belagarth kind of fixtures, old fixtures within our community, which is going to be the Realm of Durdamarian and a unit that is almost synonymous with Durdamarian, which is the Horde. 2 of my favorite organizations. I'm really looking forward to talking about these guys, but that's going to be our next episode after this. And then after that, we're going to be talking about the Jedi Handbook and how it applies to wargaming. What actual gems you can take from this particular book.
I really love these in-between episodes. Sorry, I jumped in on you there. I really love these in between. I didn't get in on the Greybirds and the Wrath episode, but that was just other stuff happening in life. So I'm excited to get to talk about other like, as much as I love talking about war, it's fun to talk about us sometimes too.
And it's a nice change of pace. It's a nice change of pace, and is a different approach to the episode. And so, we're looking forward to doing it and sharing that with y'all. And then Thumbs is going to be running not necessarily a contest necessarily, but he's a very good leather worker. He enjoys building things, and of course during this time he's been doing a lot of different projects, but he wants y'all, the listeners, to pick his next helm.
Okay, so, or at least one of my next helms, because let's be honest, I'm always working on about 16 projects at once.
That's true.
But I have been collecting patterns like a madman lately. It's just a thing that I do of like, oh, I could build that someday. Oh, I could build that someday. And I've decided that I had a couple of patterns that would be appropriate for Art of Wargaming. So I'm going to pick 5 possible helmets and let people pick which one they want me to build. I'm going to list off the 5 here. The actual poll will be up around the time this episode comes out on all of our social media. I think Facebook will be the one where we'll actually hold it. Your options are for watching me build, and I will post how-to photos, and I might actually do some like live streaming of making at the same time.
That'd be cool.
Try that out. First option is the Corinthian helmet. So basically your standard Greek hoplite helmet. Or at least something... Corinthian is the closest example I could find to the pattern. Mine's a little different, but think Greek hoplite and you will understand exactly what I'm talking about here. There's also the Galea. I'm probably not pronouncing that correct because it's Latin. It is the standard Roman centurion helmet.
Yeah.
There will be the Kabuto, or better known as the samurai helmet, which I like 4 minutes before we started recording, was desperately like, wait, what is that thing actually called? Because samurai helmet is rude.
And broad. It's a very broad idea.
Yeah, exactly. This is a popular helmet I've seen for Belagarth, and it makes sense because you can do so many weird, fancy things with them, and they just have good coverage.
For sure.
We can also do a Space Orc helmet. I am not 100% sure what this one will look like yet, because Space Orcs are so much more broad
and fluid with
in what they can do.
Yeah.
But it's going to be fun because it'd be different from all the others, because it would be purposely rougher. I would probably take a couple hacks at it with a knife just to make sure it's got the right like scars. It'll have checkerboards and the big like weird orc jaw thing. And then the final one was fun because I picked something from 40K that Malark did not know what it was. I never get to be the one that does that.
I'm not. I've only been involved in this community for not that many years, and while I do read the books quite a bit, I'm not that well read up on the Ultramarines, and so he found a helm design from the Ultramarines that I was unfamiliar with.
Well, and this is a pretty new thing apparently, because it comes from after. You said his name is Gulliman?
Gulliman, yeah, Reboot Gulliman. After
Gulliman woke up. It is called the Victrix Guard. It is just an honor guard of the Ultramarines. They've got the kind of neat wings in front of the face, kind of a wing murder mask look going on there. I will say, if you pick this one, I will let people pick. I know it says Ultramarines in this, but I will let people pick what chapter I paint it based off of.
Oh, that'd be cool.
So it could be a Dark Angels or a Blood Angels or a Space Marines that doesn't have angels in the name. The Space Wolves. I don't know.
White Scars.
White Scars. Ooh, I would love that. Oh, they've got that David Bowie lightning bolt going on. I have a thing for lightning bolts. Don't judge me.
Your entire kit is lightning bolts, mate.
I know. This is not an accident.
No. But yeah, so this will be fun, and like Thumb says, this will be being posted around the time that this episode is coming out. So be looking for that.
Yeah.
But I think that we've had quite a lengthy. I know that that 9th edition rules changes took quite a bit. I mean, it was quite a bit of notes to try to speed through. So I hope that was intelligible to all of you. But I think it's about time to get into the meat potatoes of this last chapter. What do you think, Thumbs?
I'm pretty ready to move on.
All right, so we're going to be talking about the opportunities and advantages and misfortunes of war.
Opportunities, advantages, and misfortunes of war. On the basis of this, it seems like the lesson is really easy. Just, take advantage of any opportunities that pop up. But as something I learned the hard way, it's one thing to know that, it's another to actively recognize the opportunities as they arrive. Not just, oh, that would have been great to do there, but oh, this is happening, go.
And this kind of goes back to that coup d'eil that we were talking about in previous episodes, the ability to see in an instant all the detail, which includes what kind of needs to be done in that instant. And remember that Frederick was almost always operating at a numeric disadvantage, and so just because the enemy was there, it was not a good reason to go to battle. You needed to not just have an army and another army, but you needed to have the opportunity, a specific opportunity to launch into the battle, advantages that your army have over the opponent that are going to give you an edge in that battle. And then, of course, you're trying to preempt as many misfortunes as possible. Some of these things you can't. There's just some things you cannot control that are outside of the vein of human control, but it's still a good idea to have them in your mind and have kind of a plan if they should arise. But first we're going to go over these opportunities. What are the reasons that you should join battle with the opponent? Because again, you're trying to preserve your forces while still winning whatever battle you're going on. Whether it's Belagarth or 40K, when your forces actually come together, it's got to be for one of these opportunities, is what he's saying. So the first one is chasing an enemy from your country. And I don't mean obviously if we're playing here in the United States, we're trying to chase people out of the U.S., that's illegal. We're not taking this literally. But it's a matter of like, so your side of the board, or your side of the field. This is trying to move your enemy off of that, or off of if you've got an objective that the enemy is trying to score off of. If you're doing ring the bell, capture the flag. If you're trying to kill the king, chasing an enemy away from quote unquote your country has a lot of benefits to it. It's going to give you strong morale.
Capture the flag is like the biggest one for this.
Yeah, for sure. But it's going to give you strong morale because your people are hopefully going to be like, I care about winning this match. I don't want these people in my area getting these points. And then you've also got knowledge of the terrain. Hopefully, because it's on your side, you had a chance to familiarize yourself with whatever obstacles or terrain features might be there, and you can use it to the best of your advantage. So chasing an enemy from your country, freeing up your ability to maneuver around, this is a good opportunity for battle. The next one is driving an enemy from a position that keeps you from moving. So specifically, this is like if you've got an enemy that is occupying a sniper position, or some sort of fortified thing in the middle of the field where they can hit you and strike from, but are kind of impregnable. You got to deal with that before you can do just about anything else.
At War of the Gate, we have these. We have a really interesting field because there's 2 hills, and then the owner will mow out like paths that we can go in this long grass otherwise. So it's not just like the straight on field. And he always sets up these little archer turrets that you can get into. And anytime we play on that, one of the most important things to get done is to get someone in that archer turret and stop it, because it's just a safe archer. Otherwise, they are just deadly on the field.
Oh, exactly. So, I mean, it also, like we were saying, this is very specific to War of the Gate and the way that the owner styles the field. It's going to be different for every single field you go to. So you're going to want to make it this assessment. If an enemy is in a position that keeps you from moving, again, this is a good reason to go to battle, because you got to be able to move and maneuver freely. And again, this can be anything to do in the middle of the field, something that's shaped out of the field, like what we were just talking about, ruins, fortresses, anything like that. These are good reasons for it. Another opportunity is when you force them to raise a siege. So remember, from this perspective, you control the entirety of the theater. So if you can force your enemy to raise a siege in one section, that means that you've stopped their momentum, you've stopped their forward progression, and you can engage them from a different angle. So again, in physical wargaming, we don't often have proper sieges that occur as a part of a larger thing generally, but if you can cause your opponent to just hinder their movement, if you can do something to make them so for instance, if I've got a small group of people and we find ourselves isolated in the middle of the field away from everybody else, if we, instead of like splintering and dying quickly individually, if we just stay where we are and fight like heck in order to kind of distract the enemy and draw them into that kind of morass, that can free up the rest of the army to maneuver around them, right? Mm-hmm. That's the same thing in 40K. If I've got some of these new Blade Guard veterans and I've got them holed up in a ruin in the middle of the field, and my enemy has to stop for a second and be like, okay, I can't just leave these guys here to get at my underbelly. That gives me an opportunity with the rest of my army to engage them, right? So the next one is when unable to make a move without defeating them. And this is very similar to driving an enemy from a position that keeps you from moving, but perhaps without the fortifications or without the archer turrets that, for instance, we were talking about at War of the Gate. This is just an enemy who is positioned in such a way that they have you pressed, that you are not able to maneuver to another place safely without defeating them. And so at this point, obviously, they've kind of pressed you into a position where you have to deal with them in order to get out. So in terms of Belagarth, I could see this like if you found yourself in a corner and the enemy has positioned themselves in such an area that you can't get out of that corner without defeating that enemy, well, you've just got one option, right?
Yeah, any edge of the world kind of leads up to this because it's so easy getting stuck on that spot.
Right. And so this is a good reason to come to battle. Again, you don't want to get stuck. You don't want the enemy to be able to position you and maneuver you the way that they want. So you want to kind of get out of there as quickly as possible. The next opportunity is when possible to gain superiority. So if you have an ability in this particular moment to gain superiority of your enemy, if you have a chance, you look over and you're like, okay, I have a chance to capture the flag, or I have a chance to kill the king, or I have a chance to take out one of their main players, or something like that. That's a good reason to go to battle.
Go,
right?
go.
I get an opportunity to go on somebody's archers. That's an opportunity to gain superiority. If my team has archers and theirs doesn't, that's superiority, right?
Or if they have archers and you don't, taking out those archers is just automatically like evening out the game, if nothing else, which is still a jump towards superiority.
No, that's huge. Yeah, no, that's exactly it. Or you get the chance to take out a couple of important spears or reds or something like that. Again, anybody movers and shakers, your commanders, your good fighters. When it's possible to gain a superiority, that's a good reason to go to battle, obviously. And then the last one is if the enemy commits a fault. If your enemy just massively messes up and presents an opportunity to you that you just cannot pass up. So, for instance, one of my favorite things to do, I think we've discussed this before, is to stand in the middle of the field or to have units in the middle of the field and watch my opponent move toward the edges to engage the action over there and unwittingly open up a hole somewhere near the center of their line. Now, if you're paying attention and can capitalize on this before they can react, that's dangerous.
In our battle that's going to come up later on, that was literally the goal. It didn't work, but we'll get to that.
But if your enemy commits a fault, you want to be able to exploit it to the most of your ability. So these are your opportunities. These are the reasons why you want to join battle. Again, you're not just doing it willy-nilly. You don't want to join battle because the enemy is in front of you. You want to play the time and wait for the proper opportunity to present itself. And part of that is also playing to advantages. But before we move on to that, was there anything you wanted to say about opportunities? Anything more there, Thumbs?
No, this is one of the fun ones because it's real straightforward. It's like, you mentioned it before we started recording that you love lists. And so
I do.
The end of the book here is so nice for you because he's just like, let me list everything I've taught you. And you're like, yes, please.
And he does. He's going through and just doing kind of a recap and being like, these are the big ideas. And I'm like, yes, part of the reason I love old army manuals because everything is just done with bullet points. Everything.
Yeah. But the advantages is real straightforward. This is an advantage. Go for it. The disadvantages part is where I think a little more discussion comes up.
Sure. So for these advantages, the first one is if the enemy is cut off from supplies or communication. Now again, with the way we do these games, because they're so isolated, they're a particular idea within like a larger battle, let's say, if we're doing physical wargaming or intellectual wargaming, we're not necessarily getting the whole picture, all the supply lines and whatnot. But in this particular case, if you've got your enemies surrounded, that's an advantage. If you've got them cut off from one another, that's an advantage. If you've got, like we were saying before, if you manage to kill one of the people that is shouting out orders, that's a huge advantage, right? The next one is if the terrain is favorable to the qualities of your troops. I know we like to use the Guelph as an example, but they have such a unique kind of set of fighters that they're good to use for this because you guys have such a high number of spears and archers.
Yeah, we're support squad, let's be honest.
Your frontward vector is lethal, though. Like, if you are able to occupy a narrow terrain and force people to come in at you straight on, that is a lethal line to go against straight on. So if the terrain is favorable to the qualities of your troops, for instance, in this particular case, if you can force the fight from a straight-on quadrant, that's great for the Guelph. For the Dark Angels, we're a little bit different. We like things to be open. We like to be able to maneuver. We rely on wolf packing strategy a lot.
You want to be able to be sneaksy.
We do. So the terrain favors us if it has broken features, like maybe a couple of little fortress things, some hay bales, maybe it's a little bit of woods or something that we can get quote unquote lost in, and then just kind of materialize out of.
Bam, I'm here.
So that's stuff that favors us. So the next one is terrain that focuses the fight where you choose. So as we were just talking about with the Guelph, if they're able to find terrain that focuses that fight in the forward quadrant, then they're doing just fine. If they've got terrain where the enemy can maneuver around and hit them on a flank or hit them on the side, then that it's not nearly as effective. But if they can force the fight from the front, it works out a lot better. So this is what you're kind of looking for. If you can find terrain that is both advantage, plays to the qualities of your troops, and that also forces the fight in such a way that those qualities can shine the best, that's what you're looking for out of terrain, and that gives you a very distinct advantage. Again, with With 40k, it's very much the same. Like if I'm running a high infantry army, I'm going to try to find terrain that gives me a good cover bonus, where I can kind of move on my enemy without being directly fired upon by their big guns. Whereas the opposite is true if I'm going my Imperial Guard tank list. I want nice open fields of fire where nobody can get up on me without me being able to get eyes on them and shoot them. So again, this very much depends on who you're playing, what you're playing, and how to get the most out of your army or your unit. Next would be poor positioning of the enemy. If you catch your enemy, and this one is also really good in terms of one-on-one fighting. Like if you're thinking about throwing shots, every shot you throw when you're fighting should be a shot that can draw blood, quote unquote. I notice a lot of people when they first start fighting, they throw shots that are kind of, it's like they're nervous. It's like they're nervous shots, and they're just, yeah, it's like a spray and pray, but a lot of these shots would not land if they were not blocked. I try to make sure that every single shot I throw is either moving for a leg or an arm or a torso, but that's going somewhere. It means something. But a good reason to throw that shot or to engage with your enemy, or an advantage in any situation, is poor positioning of your enemy. You know, if they've turned their back to you, if they've got their foot stance weird, if you've got them on a flank and they don't know you're there, you know, if they split in the middle like we were talking about, this poor positioning is a huge advantage, and you got to take advantage of it.
One thing, we've talked about this before, but it's one of the hard things about not having practice right now is I keep repeating stories, but Hakan, President of Belagarth, one of his best skills is how to get you into a poor position without really realizing that he's moved you that way.
Sure.
Because he'll throw like 4 or 5 shots, and it'll just move you just a little bit. Just, you know, set right there to block, and then he does his weird broken wrist thing and hits on the other side, but you... just because you're like an inch out of position.
Or for instance, when Turkey Feathers will run and try to like engage a line, and like they'll be like, we got to get Turkey Feathers, and so like 5 people will detach from the rest of the line and go chasing after Turkey Feathers. Meanwhile, there's a big gap opening right there next to all the support weapons, and it's like, okay, well, you know, they may or may not kill Turkey Feathers, but at this point, the rest of the army is in a poor position because all those people decided to haul out after one person, you know?
Yeah, it's everything we talked about wanting on the other side of the field, like right. During opportunities.
Yep. The next one that he lists, or the last one that he lists, is if you occupy positions to cover the country and won't be cut off. So in terms of 40k, if you've got good fields of fire with your big guns, that's a huge advantage. And if your opponent can't get behind you and flank you, doubly so. I mean, it's kind of the same thing with Bell, though. If you've got a good position, like these archer towers that there are on some fields, little archer redoubts, if you occupy those and you cover the country and you don't have areas on your flanks where your people are going to be able to get around you, that means that you can focus so much more on the battle right in front of you.
Oh, so much.
Yeah, and so these advantages are ones that you should... Frederick always recommends that you have more of these than your opponent, obviously. And then we had thought of a couple more that apply directly to the wargaming kind of scene. And the first one is tech. So the kind of tech that you're using is honestly really important for both 40k and Belagarth, because in 40k, if like you don't necessarily have to have the most up-to-date models, the most up-to-date army on the board to be able to do well. But if you don't have any models from like the last edition or so, like perhaps not 9th, it just started, but like let's say you were playing in 7th and you didn't get any models from 8th, your tech is kind of behind. The capabilities of your army aren't being fully expressed. You know, if you're not sitting there and making sure that the soldiers you're using are using technology that suits them, that's a huge advantage. You know, Dark Angels using plasma have an advantage over other units or other armies using plasma, because if Dark Angels don't move, they reroll 1s. So if you've got no hit modifiers going on, you're not blowing yourself up with plasma for the most part, and that's pretty awesome. So that's an advantage for Dark Angels when it comes to plasma. The tech is also huge in the foam fighting world, and as I'm sure it is in HEMA and in SEA as well. But you know, if you're using a weapon that's built on a PVC core with blue foam, that has no balance, and you're going against
you're
somebody...
going to break that thing in like a week, but...
Yeah, you're going to break that thing in a week.
I mean, even more, like, look at, you know, how shields are done. When we started, plywood was the standard for, like, a shield core.
Sure, sure.
And when we started seeing more and more shields without cores at all, I was just like, oh my god, you can do that? Which is the standard now. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages to, like, you know, a big plywood shield is only going where you want it to go. People are not maneuvering that too much like they are a much lighter shieldless thing. But depending on the situation, that inability to react quickly with your big shield works for or against you. One-on-one, I am probably going to clean someone up if they're using a 15-year-old shield. While on a big field with a line full of people with their, you know, big cord shield, strap shields, that's a lot harder for me to get around.
For sure. For sure. And flails are the same thing. Like, if you've got a flail and you've got one of these fisherman flails, you've got a large group of people. One of the things that you saw, especially about 5 years ago, were whole units went in on getting what we call fisherman flails, which is a flail that's at max length with a max chain. And it's designed to just, I mean, if you've ever seen somebody fly fish, that's the same technique. You're just throwing shots out there. And if you have an entire line of people with big shields, and that flail, like, that was the meta there for a while.
Oh, it was, everyone did it.
And then the meta changed. Then the meta shifted towards smaller shields and quicker bats and that sort of thing, and it kind of goes all over the place. But the point of the matter is, you want your tech to be as suited to you as it can be, right? So, like, all of my weapons are balanced. I take at least a day after I get a weapon and sit there and I play with it. I weight the handle, play with it, weight the handle, and I wait until it sits there, and it just feels like nothing in my hand. I have to weight my stuff in a very specific way to get the most out of it. That's a tech advantage I like to get.
Which is funny, because you used to favor the most front-heavy weapons I have ever seen in my life.
Well, that was before I jacked my body up and I had to worry about G-force, you know?
That's
like,
how you jacked your body up, let's be honest here.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. I used torque to the maximum capability. But yeah, so tech is huge, and it changes. The meta changes, the tech changes, and of course this is true in real war too. Like when rifling first came on the scene, it made a big difference between those who had it and those who didn't. Oh yeah, and it was a rush in order to get that. Same thing when the nuclear weapon came on the scene. Like there was a rush. There was this whole nuclear arms race in order to get up there with this whole tech idea. So this isn't just wargaming. This is the whole idea of war throughout forever is about evolution and adaptation to what's going on.
You really want to see that at its most, like, fundamental, the shift from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age. The countries that shifted to iron suddenly were way more powerful than they ever were before.
No doubt. No doubt. So yeah, tech can be a huge advantage. Again, it doesn't. I've absolutely seen people who have older gear beat people who've got the new up and coming stuff. It is not the advantage, but it definitely makes a difference.
It would be lying to pretend it doesn't help.
Yeah, and then the last one that we came up was numbers. Numbers themselves can be a huge advantage. Of course, Frederick didn't necessarily list this one because he was always at a numeric disadvantage. So I don't know if he would necessarily see numbers at an advantage because he was constantly beating people who had the numbers. But I've absolutely seen in Belagarth and in 40K that just the sheer number of bodies that you can commit to an objective or to a particular action really makes a difference. I mean, the entire Imperial Guard, Tyranids, Orcs, a lot of their strategy is built on this entire idea of just having a numeric advantage.
One of the only 40k games I ever played, because, like, when I was about 20, I played like 3 games thinking, I'll get into this, and went, holy god, it's expensive. And I was in college. I had a swarm of orc boys, and I went up against a Grey Wolves, Space Wolves, like, close range squad, and they killed like 4 times as many as they lost, but I had about 5 times as many troops.
Right. So you could afford it.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing. I know that when I was in the South, I know I've talked about Ravnus before, but I was just super impressed. Several of the events I went to in the South, just the turnout that Ravnus had, and Ravnus had some really good fighters, and they had a really good tactics and all that other thing working for them. But the fact that they also had a good numeric advantage at a lot of these events meant that they were performing extremely well. I was there between 2014 and 2015, so I mean this was like 5 years ago. But they were like, when they turned out in force, they were something to be reckoned with. That was surprising to me. I come from Montana. They're nowhere near Montana. Again, I talk about Ravnus to people around here, and they're like, Ravnus? What's Ravnus? And I'm like, they're an awesome unit from the south.
I only know about them because
I do talk about them a lot.
It's okay. I talk to Easterners. I'm like, I'm Gelf. And they're like, what the hell are the Gelf?
Yeah. I mean, again, the Great Grass Sea. We've got it in the middle of the country. It divides the community in a lot of ways. So those are the advantages. Did I miss anything there, Thumbs? We got all the advantages.
I think that's pretty straightforward.
So again, you want to have more of those than your enemy does. That's the basic math with that. And so now, before we finish up this section, we want to talk about misfortunes. So these misfortunes are things that you can't necessarily plan for. You do want to have contingencies in place in order to maybe deal with some of these ideas, but a lot of this stuff you're not going to be able to control. So for instance, bad weather. I can't tell you how many events I have had ruined by bad weather. Again, this isn't going to be huge for 40k because there's not a whole... I mean, unless you're doing some narrative play missions or something like that where you have some sort of weather mechanic that's in play. But for those of us who do physical wargaming, bad weather is huge.
I went to a thaw brawl where my dominant kit at the time was a round backpack shield and a glaive, and it was the windiest event I have ever been to. And like, I literally couldn't fight in that weather with my dominant kit because it was so windy that it was like both the glaive and the backpack shield were being like a sail.
Sure.
Like, I was just having trouble control. No archery could be done at that event because you tried to shoot and they would just opposite. It would automatically just go totally where you did not want it to go.
Yep. Wind is a big deal. Rain is another big deal. Rain will ruin tents, ruin garb, ruin weapons, ruin armor. Of course, makes everything very slick. Yep, and so headshots and injuries will become a lot more common when you've got rain. It's also very fun. I don't want to necessarily... there's been a couple of events where it's been like a warm rain, and you get out there, and I mean, you get disgusting, but in the same moment, it can be a lot of fun if you've got a nice warm camp to go back to.
Yeah. You're having a great time, but you're wrecking everything.
You are. Like, I did destroy my sword, so, like, bad weather, that's a misfortune that can befall you. So he says bad harvest. That's not necessarily something literally that we're going to have to deal with, but one of the examples of a bad harvest may be, let's say you're planning on 50 of your unit mates showing up, and only 15 of them actually show up.
There's a bad harvest.
That can be a bad harvest. Yeah, you're like, oh, I was expecting a lot more than what I got. That's not great.
Another thing we talked about here is for 3 books we've talked about this, and we're going to talk about it in every book, of how important being properly fed is.
Oh, yeah.
And if, for whatever reason, you're not properly fed that event, and Lord knows I've had plenty of those, that's a bad harvest. If I am hungry, I mean, it's literally what he's warning about. Like, if I don't have enough food, I'm not going to perform very well. Yep,
your mind starts to go, the body starts to go. Again, I don't eat directly before I fight. I tend to get nauseous if I eat right before fighting. But, like, once I get off the field, if I retire from the field for the day, the first thing I do is stuff my face full of every piece of protein I can possibly find.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, the bad harvest, again, you can't necessarily plan for that all the time. You can't necessarily plan if your unit mates are going to have last things come up at the last minute. You know, let's say you brought some food, but it went bad. You know, you were bringing some fresh fruit or some fresh vegetables, but on the way they molded or something like that. Like, that's bad harvest. That's misfortune.
I had that happen on Trail Cruise, and it was always just like, oh, no.
Yep. Like, the one onion goes bad, and you're like, no! We needed that to add flavor to everything.
For the whole week. Yeah.
Another thing you can't control, another misfortune, would be the decisions of officers. So even though you're given orders, even though people might have the plan, you can't necessarily always control what people are going to do. I might be in charge of the left wing, and I might be like, we're going to go forward, and Thumbs might be in charge of the right wing, and he might be like, we're going to go back, and it causes a split in the forces and that's just a decision. That's just decisions he's making, decisions I'm making that didn't necessarily mesh up with one another.
Also, lack of decision comes up here. The number of times that, like, you have to make the call and you just go, and you can feel your brain just like stop.
Burnside,
or I've done it plenty of times. Let's not pretend I haven't. That moment of there's just too many things of too many choices to make and your brain decides on none of them, that falls under bad decisions of officers here.
Right. So again, this could be a misfortune. These decisions of officers, again, not so much in 40K. You're not going to see bad decisions of officers because you're in control of everything, and your officers aren't necessarily making their own decisions, which is kind of nice.
So it's bad decisions of you in this case, I guess.
Yeah, you. Yeah, your decisions. They might cause misfortune. You might juke when you should have jived or something like that. Sickness. Sickness is the next one, and this is a very real topic right now, of course, but even in years when we're not beset by a plague, sickness always is an issue at events because people are sharing drinks or just sharing close proximity, not necessarily washing their hands as much as they should, not bathing as much as they should. Same thing at tournaments. You see the same thing anytime you've got a bunch of nerds crammed into one place having a good time. Sickness is absolutely a possibility, and you cannot tell me that you do not perform worse when you got the flu or something like that.
Yeah, you stay up all night enjoying nightlife, and the next day you're not running at 100%. We can count that as sickness here.
Sure. Yeah, a lot of the different things can cause, and so anything that has you not performing at your physical peak, whether it be sleep deprivation or weird chemical states or food or an actual bug, a virus or bacteria or something.
Or actual insects, because you've had those allergic reactions that messed you up.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's true, too. Don't forget that mosquitoes and ticks and all other sorts of bloodsuckers exist out there that are ready to ruin your event. There was one Chaos Wars that I didn't get to do anything because I just developed an inexplicable golf ball collection on my skin from these bites, and I had to be on Benadryl the entire week. I don't know if you've ever tried to swing stick when you got a head full of Benadryl.
I wouldn't. I just straight would not.
More inclined to go find a shady tree to go and just rest under for a while. And so, yeah, this can be a real thing. And of course, when we're talking about real battle, sickness is, of course, cholera. It's any of the but dysentery, bubonic plague, smallpox, it's the actual sicknesses that have devastated countries, devastated armies. So, I mean, this is a real misfortune that can befall you, and it can be really bad, real bad. Because, yeah, I've definitely gotten what we used to call event plague. I don't know if that term is going to go away after we've all experienced this real plague.
A little too real now, yeah.
But it's it was always a combination of somebody would bring in a cold from California and somebody would bring in a flu from Washington and somebody from Montana would bring some sort of stomach bug, and what you'd get was this heady mix of awful that half the people in the event would leave with, and we just call it whatever it is.
Well, and a lot of times people would be like, don't come to an event if you've been sick, but you might have been well for the last week, but you still have the leftover that you're kind of giving off, even though you're not feeling it. And the poor people from across the country do not have the same protections that you have.
Or you could get sick a couple of days before you go. It could still be an incubation. You're not even symptomatic at that point. You arrive at the event, suddenly you pop a fever, and you're symptomatic and you're contagious. I mean, there's there are absolutely people who are inconsiderate and just come being you know what, I don't care that I have a full-blown head cold, I'm going anyways. That absolutely exists. But people can also just bring it on accident. Not everybody's out as a malicious monger of Nurgle trying to spread Nurgle's gifts to everybody. That's I never did on purpose anyways.
I've heard so many Nurgle jokes the last 4 months.
It's so perfect. If you're not going to make them now, there is no time to make them. You've got an entire community of Nurgle players that have been waited their entire Warhammer career to make these jokes.
My time has come.
So yeah, sickness. I think we've belabored this point. Sickness is definitely a misfortune. Injury. We if you're at a tournament, you can fall down some stairs, you can slam your hand in a door, anything like that can happen. But especially at anything, so that's intellectual wargaming, you can get injured. But in terms of physical wargaming, injury happens all the time. You've got concussions, you've got broken fingers, you got broken hands, broken noses, broken arms, broken legs,
rolled ankle, or even just hardcore bruises, if it's in the right spot, can mess you up. I took when low pro spears first became a thing, they were smaller than they are now. They were the absolute minimum size. And I took one in the floating rib, and it didn't break anything, but it was just a deep purple, and I literally could not swing my sword for like 2 days
Sure.
of the event.
Sure, or you take a really good shield check and it knocks the wind out of you, and you hit the deck, and it just jacks you up. So I mean, like, injuries can happen. Your prized fighter or your prized crew might accidentally get injured. I mean, Turkey Feathers one year, he took a red to the hand and his hand folded in half where it's not supposed to fold in half. Couldn't help out his team anymore. It wasn't his fault, nobody blamed him for it, but these are the kind of misfortunes that can befall us in something like this. Of course, more so in real war. It's you're playing for a lot more higher stakes in real war, and injury can it takes a much realer form there.
Well, yeah, in real war we have that dude got shot.
Yeah, that's a big deal, getting shot. So then the next one is a blunder. So a blunder would be a misunderstood order. So if you're telling people to go forward and they mishear you and they go backwards, or they misunderstand the plan at the beginning and they do something wrong, or in the case of thumbs, if you've got a wardrobe malfunction of some sort.
I had this helm that I used to use all the time. Forkbeard made it. Beautiful helm. But it was completely covered. It completely covered the front of the mouth. There were no air holes there. There were no slats or anything. And no one could hear a word I was saying. So I'd be like, people are coming. Go left. And what everyone else in the group heard was... And they're like, did he say go right? I guess. No, maybe. And I'm like, why are you not listening to me?
So you've got Kenny from South Park driving the bus at that point.
Yeah, it was not helpful for anybody.
So that would be considered a blunder at that point, because again, the meaning is being misconstrued and being misheard all over the place, and it can happen to anybody. But that results in people being out of position, not where they're supposed to be, and it's a big deal. And again, this doesn't necessarily happen in 40K, because again, you got a telepathic communication with your dudes on the field. You're the one moving them, so hard to misunderstand exactly what's going on there. But this could also be a misunderstood rule. You may be thinking that a rule works a particular way, and then you move and you're like, oh, wait a minute, no, it doesn't. Crap, I'm out of position, but it's too late now. So yeah, blunders are an issue. Another issue would be the death of a valuable officer or of a valuable fighter. In 40K, if you lose one of your captains, one of your guys who's giving you re-rolls, that could be a big issue. Any of your key players, and of course in Belagarth, even though each fighter matters, having everybody on the field, each person brings something to it. Of course, numbers are a big thing. But we are going to have certain people who stand out, certain people who are better at killing or better at surviving than other people on the field are. And if you happen to lose one of those people early on, well, that could be a compromising issue right there.
The number of times I've seen someone come up with the plan, being like, okay, guys, this round we'll do this. And then Leon's called, and an arrow just plunks them in the head, and they drop. And you can just see the entire team go, ugh.
Now what?
Big sighs, shoulders drop. Even if you're still going to do the plan, that is just an automatic, like, oh no.
And again, this is either somebody who's a commander of some sort, somebody who shouts orders, or somebody who's very good, somebody who's got a high skill in combat. A loss of either of these people, especially when everybody can see it, can be an issue. Of course, in real war, you can think about Stonewall Jackson. He was Lee's right-hand man. Lee depended on him not just as a general, but also as a friend and a comrade. And so when Lee lost Jackson, you can see how it compromised him at Gettysburg. He made a lot of decisions at Gettysburg that were not very Lee-like, but when you consider how close Gettysburg was to the death of Jackson, and him not having that person that he'd come to rely on at that battle, well, a lot of those mistakes make a lot more sense because of the misfortune of the death of a valuable officer. And all of these things, again, all of these misfortunes can contribute to this next one, which is low morale. Low morale is one of the biggest killers of any army, any unit, any, especially in the games we play. A lot of these changes that have been made to 40K, especially more so there, but within Belagarth, there can be a lot of things that contribute to low morale. Of course, bad weather. If people are sleeping in soggy tents with their sleeping bags flooded out, that can contribute to bad morale. You got injured, you got sick. That's bad morale right there.
You've got unit drama going down, or realm drama, or whatever, any kind of drama.
you've got real life issues going on. You got issues with your roommates, issues at work, issues with the spouse, issues with, traffic or something like that you didn't let go. Like anything like that can contribute to low morale. And low morale is a huge misfortune that can really play a part in your unit not doing well and not performing very well. And sometimes you can't control it. Again, if you have the death of a valuable officer and people are bummed out by that, again, that's not something you can necessarily do anything about. People are bummed out, We can try to do things as a group to try to boost morale and try to keep everybody together and keep spirits up, but there's just some things that are going to drop that. So the next one would be exposure of spies. And again, we don't necessarily have literal spies within our communities, or at least we hope we don't. But if your intelligence means are exposed, or if your plans are exposed, let's say that I've got a plan to do X, Y, or Z at this tournament, and somebody else finds out about it. That's exposure. That's a intelligence failure. That's a misfortune in a lot of ways. Yeah, I'm trying to think of a way it applies to 40K, and I'm having trouble.
I don't have a huge one for this one. I'm not going to lie with you.
I don't either. That's a bit of a stretch, everything I can think about. And the next one would be negligence of your intel officers. It's the same idea. If your intel officers haven't provided you with an accurate depiction of what's going on the ground, if the person who's in the back of the line who's supposed to say, hey, enemy to the rear, doesn't say that, and they get killed, and then by the time that everybody else notices, there's 5 more people that have been killed, that's an intelligence failure. If somebody's not hollering out what's going on, if people aren't aware of everything that's going on, you got negligence of intel officers there. Of course, in a literal sense, if we're arriving at the field and I'm talking to a unit mate and they're giving me bad information on who's there, that's negligence of an intel officer in that particular case. And then the last one, of course, is betrayal. This is pretty straightforward. You have somebody who misrepresents their intentions and then turns on you to your misfortune. That's betrayal. You try to discourage it to the best of your ability, but sometimes it just happens. Sometimes people switch sides. Sometimes people quit. Sometimes people don't do what they say they're going to do.
It's a thing that you see at Chaos Wars. They do like the banner battles, and units will team up to try and win the thing, and then maybe a unit changes sides. We've talked about the Gelf on the Urukai. I've seen Horde do this before. And it's one of those things that I always like in theory because, man, it adds a level of, intrigue and politics to the game. But you have to be really careful about how you go about it because it's really easy. Because, if you're spending a week doing nothing but this, you get really into it and you want to make sure that you're not causing hurt feelings at the same time.
The feel bads, again, are contributing to low morale because, again, you have to remember that it's not just... Most of the time, even if I'm out there with the Dark Angels, I don't go back to camp and hang out exclusively with Dark Angels. We got friends in other camps. We wander around. People wander through.
That's my main thing I do at Nightlife.
Yeah, so if we inflict feel bads on everybody else and then we go try to associate with them during Nightlife, that's not fun. Nobody wants us around because we were being a bunch of pills on the field that nobody wants to play with now. Yeah. So yeah, be careful with this. Again, it's fun to be a little Game of Thronesy every now and then for sure, but you also got to remember that these are your friends and you want to be able to break bread with them at the end of the day. So I think that's the opportunities, advantages, and misfortunes in war, as Frederick kind of described them and as we've kind of distilled them for intellectual and physical wargaming. You have anything else to add on that subject, Thumbs?
I think we're set to go on. This is going to be a 2-hour episode.
Indeed. So we're going to move on now to what to do during downtime.
So generally when people ask me about winter fighting, my answer is just don't. But a lot of that comes from, I have to admit here, that I live in Montana, or the people that live in, Canada are going to have a very different relationship with this than the people who live in Southern California.
Or in the South or something like that, yeah.
Yeah, really anywhere, much farther south than us. Talking to my friend Ace, and I was like, oh, it's like January. And it's like, oh, it's a nice summer day. Or not summer. It's a nice winter day. And she goes, yeah, I don't know what people complain about. People say 40's cold. It's not that cold. I'm like, yep, you're right. It is a balmy and sunny 9 degrees out today. And it was 10, 15 degrees warmer than it had been for the previous week. So this is, when we talk about this, even though we'll have advice for everyone, remember that this is different for us than it might be for you.
And even in general, some of this stuff still applies to everybody. But again, obviously, the severity of winter is going to determine a lot of what your activity level can be in the winter. For instance, I broke my wrist one year because I took a hit wrong from a cold sword on a winter day because we were determined to practice outside, and I spent the whole next season fighting offhand single blue because my wrist was busted on my main hand. So, there's very real reasons for this.
We had a season where, God, you, me, Turkey Feathers, War Master Hakan, Sir Tethian, and a few other rotating people were all living in the same house, and we kept being like, we keep spraining our wrists, why? And then we're like, oh, right, because it's December and we're fighting outside.
Yep, and it was a bad call.
Who could have possibly seen this coming?
So a lot of these rules also apply to what we're going through right now. So on this show, we've tried to stay away from necessarily talking about the ongoing pandemic too specifically, because we figure a lot of people are trying to listen to us as a way to kind of escape from that collective hell that we're all experiencing. That being said, this does count as downtime, and so a lot of these same rules that would apply to winter quarters also apply to plague quarters. So keep that in mind as we're talking about this. So the first one that he talks about, a good idea during the winter quarters phase of the year, is to keep in communication. And this is with your realm leaders, your unit members, your realm members, friends from across the country. Just, you got to keep in touch, especially during the winter when a lot of people get the blues. It's a good idea to just, make sure you're doing these mental health checks with each other, and just, we're not just a community that gets together to fight. We're also generally a group of friends that takes care of each other, and so this is a good chance to do so.
We see this with in the realm. We'll just do like straight up, health check. How's everyone report in? Or you and I both do, about once a week or so, we pick a couple random friends that we haven't talked to in a while and be like, hey, checking in, how are you? Like, it doesn't have to be complicated.
Sure. And again, this is also a good idea, like with your realm and unit, to kind of make plans. The winter is a good time to get your ideas in order for what you want to do the next season, where you want to go, what the general goals are. And so keeping in communication with everybody keeps everybody on the same page and working towards the same objectives. So this is a good idea too. And again, we have an off season in the Warhammer community as well. There's times when there's no tournaments going on, or perhaps you're unable to get to them. And this is a good time to keep in communication with other people, keep an idea of what's going on in the meta, and stay involved. The next one is that the troops need to be rested, because again, we are a very impressive species, and we are able to accomplish a lot with our bodies, no doubt. But we do break down over time, and things like ligaments and cartilage either don't repair or take a very long time to repair. And so it's a good idea to take a mild rest period during this time, even if you've got winter practices. Even though we've got our very severe winters here in Montana, we also have the fortune of being closely associated with the university. And so we often are able to secure a practice space during the winter. But a lot of this practice is a lot more low-key than it is during the regular season, because people are trying to take it easy and not mess themselves up during the off-season.
Yeah, part of it's because, a gym floor is way easier to hurt yourself on than the soft loam, but it's also just, it's a good time to just kind of relax and chill out and more have this like moment to enjoy yourselves with your friends than hardcore competition time.
And not to mention, it also can be a good idea just to take a break every now and then, like take a couple practices off, or especially if your realm doesn't have winter practices, to not necessarily do a whole lot of heavy fighting, because during that time you can still work on perfecting your form, and you can iron out a lot of bad habits. There's been several occasions where I felt like I was in a rut, where I was sitting there and I was like, man, I don't feel like I'm progressing, or I feel like I'm backsliding, and this is really bothering me. And then I took like a period of time off. I come back, and because those bad habits aren't so fresh, you're able to kind of move past them and kind of maneuver around them a little bit easier. And so this rest can be really good for kind of resetting your mind, resetting your play style, so that you can be open to learning new things again.
Well, and this can entirely be a mental thing, too. I've had people who are they're struggling at practices. They're trying, they want to enjoy themselves. It's not happening. So, take a couple weeks off. If you're not having fun, why are you coming here? And trying to force yourself to have fun pretty much never works.
Right. That's the opposite of having fun. Yeah.
But take a few weeks, get whatever's going on, and then come back when it is fun again. I've seen people fight so much better when that happens.
So the resting prevents burnout, too. Like, you don't want to, the last thing you want is for something that you enjoy to become tedious or to become a chore. So this rest can also prevent that burnout. So rest. It's a good idea. The next thing is a lot of quartermaster ideas, because this downtime is a good idea to review your kit and review your gear. So this is a good time to be getting new uniforms, Frederick says. So for us, that's new garb, new shoes, new paint jobs for your models. All this stuff can be done during this time. Of course, new weapons. You want to be going through and figuring out what weapons need their tips replaced, what weapons might have had their pommels blow out, which ones are going to be getting close to failing. For instance, I'm redoing my armory right now because most of my weapons I cannot remember when I purchased them, which is a bad sign.
Yeah, I've gone a little overboard on this one because I was like before the episode being like, what have I made or remade since the pandemic started? And I'll talk about that. And oh my god, I've been making so much stuff, guys. I'm like 4 or 5 helms and a couple of breastplates and this and these weapons and 5 shields and so all of us crafty people, this is the easy one. The moment that we have downtime, we're like, oh my god, I'm gonna make everything now.
For sure. But it's good for the rest of us, too. Like, for me, I'm getting a new garb kit. I'm getting new shoes. I'm getting new weapons. Like, all that stuff is... I'm making sure that all of that is set for the next season. Because, again, garb breaks down. It gets holes. It gets, smelly after a while. Shoes are
that
a big one
that we don't think about.
Yeah, I need to replace my shoes every season or so because I am rough on my shoes. And then your feet are constantly changing and growing, and your needs are different based on your ankle support and that sort of thing. And so you want to make sure that your shoes are constantly updated to continue to do their job, which is make your footwork as easy as possible. And then after this comes constant drill. So it's a balance, of course. Balance between resting yourself and a balance between constant drill. Again, during this off time, I've been running my forms, not just as a daily exercise, but also to kind of blow off some steam. Before we did this show, I was kind of sitting here with some nervous energy, and so I ran through with my boken and did some katas based on the 12 shots, which, again, video is coming. Don't worry. It'll be here by winter, so you guys can use it for your winter time.
Please.
Yeah, inshallah. But and so this constant drill idea is an extremely a good idea. You want to keep your skills fresh. You want to keep your ideas up. Again, I'm playing Warhammer games against myself. I'm playing Kill Team against myself, reviewing my rules just to make sure all that stuff is fresh. And then, of course, exercising my body as I can. That's the other thing. A part of this. Again, you don't want to break yourself at the gym and then not have anything for Belagarth, but in the same idea, it's a good idea to maybe get up a cardio routine since you're going to have less cardio in the winter, or perhaps start doing some light calisthenics or aerobic exercise in order to increase mobility, strength, or endurance.
Yeah, if you don't practice your cardio and go to practice, you feel it that next practice.
Oh yeah. I mean, even though I've been trying to get some cardio in, I know the first practice I do, I'm going to be out there, I'm going to sound like an 80-year-old smoker. I'm just going to be wheezing the entire time, just gasping for air.
If it helps, all of us will.
Yeah, a lot of us are going to be in that. I see a lot of people hitting the gym, so there's going to be a few people who are just going to be leagues ahead of the rest of us. But for most of us, it's going to be a hard adjustment. And the last thing in this winter quarters section is you want to keep up-to-date rosters. So you want to know who's a part of the unit, a part of the realm, and just make sure that the rosters are good. Who's sticking around, who's coming in. This is a good time. You got downtime anyways, so get your paperwork in order, get that administrative stuff taken care of.
There's a whole lot of that happening around. Just Gelfer doing it. I know some Stygia's doing it. I'm sure other groups are doing it, but those are the 2 groups I see.
Dark Angels are doing it. I mean, again, we've all got our private boards, and so nobody's doing it necessarily where everybody can see it, but everybody's keeping in touch. Everybody's got their rosters and is doing this portion. So the last section here is on winter campaigns. And so this is kind of activities or events to be done in winter. And again, this doesn't necessarily apply to Warhammer because you're driving to a nice heated building. You've hopefully got a hotel room. You're not camping out under the stars. So the winter campaigning isn't as big of a deal for us in the Warhammer community, but the physical wargaming community, it applies a lot more so. So only do it when absolutely necessary, is what Frederick advises. And part of that reason is because you don't get any time to rest or resupply. If you continue fighting through the winter months or throughout any downtime that's provided, you don't have the time to rest and resupply, to get those new uniforms, the new shoes, the new weapons, to implement new drill and new tactics. There isn't this time. And so that's an important thing to consider. And of course, if it's absolutely necessary, I went to like 8 events one year when I was living in Tennessee, and there was a winter event that I absolutely needed to make it to. You got to do what you got to do, but you also have to understand the risks involved, because there is a greater chance of sickness and injury. When I had that full year in Durdamarian, when I didn't have the winter to rest, I got pneumonia that winter. And I mean, I'm not saying everybody who works through the winter is going to get sick or is going to get injured, but you are going to have a higher chance of doing so because you're not allowing yourself that time to rest and recuperate.
Well, and it's just dangerous in winter anyways. Every January, I always just get sick as a dog for like 3 days. Not always the same week, but always in like January.
And not always the same sickness either. Sometimes it's the flu, sometimes it's the strep, sometimes it's the cold. We also that sort of thing. They love the winter months. Them little bugs love the winter months. Something will happen. So it's a good idea. I know some guys, like Alistair, for instance. I don't remember the last time I saw him in a winter practice. He basically, even though we have winter practices here, he'll take the entire winter off because he understands that not only are people more moody during the winter, but also injury is more common and sickness is more common. And so in a lot of ways, I look at him and I'm like, yeah, that's not a bad idea. By the time the next season rolls around, you're spry, you're ready to go. And the rest of us are like, oh, I busted my shoulder this last January and I haven't had time to heal up.
He's a smart guy, that Alistair.
Yeah, he is. But there are activities. Again, we're not saying that you have to completely suspend everything during the winter months or during this town time either. Like, again, we recognize that doing full-on events is not a responsible thing to do at the moment, and most places aren't doing organized practices. Small groups of people are still getting together and hopefully doing safe sparring. But there's other activities you can do as well to keep your community active and keep yourself involved. For instance, I'm working on a proposal for Stygia right now that is called CLASS. And of course, I'm ex-military, so we love acronyms, so that's CLASS, and it stands for Cumulative Learning and Stygian Strategy. Yeah.
And of course, it's just a class. Like, it's very straightforward.
Right, and it's just going to be a class. It's going to be like and so the idea is when practices actually get started going again, it's going to be an organized way to teach the basics and advanced techniques to noobs and vets alike in the Stygian community. We've seen a very similar program in Wrath. Run very successfully. I've seen something done in Durdamarian similarly as well, so we kind of want to get something like that going here in Stygia. But during this downtime, hopefully it's going to be leading discussions, kind of discussions online, keeping people thinking about this, giving people ideas for how to improve their home workouts or home routines, keeping people's spirits up. So that's going to be the kind of the purpose of this. Thumbs has been running this garb contest. By the time this episode comes out, I think the garb contest is going to be over, but this was a cool way to kind of bring people together and get the creative juices flowing,
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I've got people who I've not met messaging me, showing off stuff they're excited about doing. I'm like, that's amazing.
That's cool.
And it's weird to talk about on this because where we're recording, there's another week until it's done. But by the time this comes out, it'll have finished 2 weeks ago, I think. Ish.
Right. Yeah, we have to... I've got a calendar that has all this organized because I can't keep it organized in my head. It's an interesting thing, recording schedules. But yeah, so that's another thing. Having anything that kind of engage... People love competition and people love making things, so that's a fun way of engaging both of those needs that people have. Game nights is another thing we had been talked about. Like I think Stygia hosts like a Discord game night every week, and I know...
Yeah, Beatrice specifically, she deserves credit for that one, because would not happen without her.
Yeah, so so that's awesome. That's a way to get people together, get people having fun, loosening up. And again, these things apply in the winter, too. Durdamarian would do a winter, I think it was like a dinner, or like an after-practice dinner that everybody was invited to. Even if you didn't go to practice, you were kind of invited to come to this dinner and just participate in the group Durdamarian experience, which is very loud.
Yeah, I imagine every the Guelph local Stygian Guelph will throw a Christmas party every year, or Guelphmas as we call it. We've done it 3 times now, and I don't know how the 4th one is happening, but we had amazing plans for it. It's a lot of fun to just be weird and goofy in the middle of winter. And these small things, even when you have fighting going on, it's important because it's good to remind each other that we like each other and that we like spending time with each other.
Sure. And that personal connection is huge. It's the reason why anybody stays in any community, is that personal connection. Which also, like you would talk about having the Guelph happy hour every week, or any sort of unit video chats, just like keeping in touch and just, touching base and seeing how people are, and making sure people are doing okay.
Yeah, I know twice a week that I can go on to the Happy Gelfin Hour and see people that I never see otherwise.
And then lastly, you've got virtual events. As of this recording, Chaos Wars just wrapped up recently. They did all of Chaos Wars, which is normally a week-long fighting event. It was done online. And so you had a bunch of different rooms, different chats. There was an actual there was a DJ one night where you could go and listen to the music and party with people online. It was it was a really cool idea.
There were classes everywhere. There were different camps for different units. It was called Chaos 23.5, the year that wasn't. And honestly, people have just kept that Discord going. Because they're like, nope, we're not giving this up. We need this right now.
And again, it's a good way to connect. We all need that right now. We all need a little bit of that human connection, a little bit of that reason why we're sticking through it together, and remember that we're not alone. Remember that we've got each other and that we're going to be able to get through this. We're going to get through this. So speaking of getting through this, I think we got through this. I think that was the meat and potatoes,
I think we just tore through that section right there.
Yeah, so that's some advice on how to spend downtime and kind of the last word of Frederick. So the next time we're doing an actual book on this, we'll be doing Vegetius. We're looking forward to that. But as for right now, I think it's about time to move on to talking about the Battle of Suomussalmi.
The thing I cannot pronounce.
The Battle of Suomussalmi is a really good example of particularly those opportunities, advantages, and misfortunes in war, but also of kind of the dangers and perils of running a winter campaign, which is part of the reason we selected it for this this battle for this episode. For those of you who don't recognize the name Suomussalmi, it comes from Finnish, which is the country in which this battle takes place. Now, you're about to hear me butcher a bunch of names again because there's a lot of landmarks and, proper names that are in Finnish. And I mean, I studied a little bit of Norwegian. You can ask my friend Mary that my Norwegian it's understandable, but it's not great. And Finnish is a whole nother linguistic group. And so, again, if we have any Finnish listeners or anybody from the Norwegian-speaking countries, I am so sorry for the butchery that we're about to do, but we're going to do our best because these are a lot of names that English speakers...
The Montana accents are not helping here either.
No. But so for a bit of context, Suomussalmi occurred between the 7th of December, 1939, and the 8th of January, 1940. It was between the Soviets and the Finns during the Winter War. So to give a little background on this Winter War, it began on the 30th of November with the Soviet invasion of Finland. This was 3 months after the outbreak of World War II. Okay, so things were in full swing in terms of that whole continent being on fire.
This is about 3 years before America's going to jump in.
Right. So this is under the pretext of securing Leningrad. So the Finnish border was about 20 miles or 32 kilometers away from Leningrad, which was the Soviet capital. They had told the Finnish government, you need to cede certain land to us in order for us to be able to secure this area. The Finns said, of course not, that's our sovereign land. And the Soviets used this as a pretext for invasion. So that was kind of the Winter War. Let's frame this a little bit because we had a huge number disparity going on here. The Soviets, who were under Ivan Dashishev and Alexei Vinogradov, numbered somewhere between 45,000 and 55,000. Now, by the end of this fight, there would be between 13,000 and 23,000 killed or missing, and 2,100 captured. That's huge.
That is a quarter to half of their people dead or missing.
Yep. And that's a large number. Now you compare that to the Finns, who ended up being under the command of Colonel Hjalmar Silasuo. Yeah. I know he's a Finnish hero, so I'm sorry to butcher his name. I would love for somebody to write in and tell me how to pronounce that properly, because I tried to look it up and I was having a hard time. But they numbered at 11,500. But by the end of this, they only had 750 killed or missing and 1,000 wounded. So that is a huge number disparity. Yeah, especially when you consider the numbers that were coming into this. So let's talk about how this went down. On the 30th of November 1939, the Soviets crossed the border. Their objective is Oulu, which is the capital of Finland, and their aim is to bisect the country, divide it in half. Now, again, this was a good theory, because if they were able to do this, of course, they secure the country, they create the two fronts, and then they also we're going to get at this rail line that was like the lifeblood of communications and supply when it came to Finland. And so that was the objective of all this. Now, okay, a little spoiler here. If you've ever been to Montana, this plan would be a little bit like trying to draw a straight line across Montana and maneuver it with your troops, because Montana is mostly logging roads. We have a few interstates and that sort of thing, but most of Montana is logging roads. So trying to get a straight shot across Montana is nigh impossible. It's going to take you through some pretty rough country. And Finland is very similar to Montana. It's a lot wetter than Montana, but you've got a lot of forests, a lot of mountains, a lot of very impassable areas. So you've got these narrow logging roads that the Soviet army was confined to. They had to maneuver on because of the heavy vehicles they were using.
If you take something like, Italy, France, probably Britain, although it might be different because it's an island, split it in half, it is very difficult for the British to deal with it, or the whoever. But if you do that in rural country, they're like, yeah, whatever. Like, I'm just gonna go through the forest anyways. Like,
and they know the country so much better. The Finns knew the country so much better, and so this plan was kind of doomed from the onset. Now, you also have to remember that the Soviet commanders and the Soviet government in general was brand spanking new at this point. The fall of the Tsar had happened within most people's memories at this point.
It's about 20 years old, we think.
And a lot of the older commanders and the people who would have had experience in previous wars were either dead or exiled. And so you had a very new apparatus and a very new idea of operating. And so this was kind of a testing ground for a lot of those ideas, as part of the reasons that the Soviets kind of had so many issues here, and led their refinement in future combat. So they move into Finland. On the 7th of December, the Soviets take Suomussalmi with very little resistance. Now, the Finns had destroyed the previous village to deny shelters to the Soviets, and so the Soviets were kind of confined to Suomussalmi in terms of shelter and protection. Now, and the Finns withdrew then to the opposite shore of lakes Niskanselkä and Haukipara. I swear half of this show is just listening to me mispronounce names.
We should note that these are that these are frozen lakes.
But yes, frozen lakes that they're moving across, and of course, wide open expanses. So on the 8th of December, the next day, the Soviets attack across the western lakes, attempting to engage the Finns. Now again, imagine the exposure of moving across an open lake, a frozen lake, no cover, and it failed completely. This attack failed completely. They were repulsed back into the city. They tried another maneuver toward Puolanka, but a newly arrived Finn detachment defeats them there as well. So, frustration is mounting in the Soviet lines. 9th of December, the defenders are then reinforced. This is when Hjalmar Silasuo comes onto the scene. So Colonel Silasuo is given command of the forces, and the main forces is assault Suomussalmi, but they are driven back with some fairly significant losses. This is when most of these losses that we see, these killed and missing, occur for the Finns, is during this kind of frontal attack that they make. So then it kind of it's a stalemate for a while. The next action we see is on the 24th of December. The Soviets counterattack, and it fails to break through because the Finns are surrounding them at this point. And so the Soviets attack, but they don't have the support, and they've got all this stuff coming from all sides. They fail to break out. And on the 27th of December, the Finns attack Suomussalmi, a nice frontal attack. They break the Soviet line, and the Soviets retreat in panic, sweeping along the 44th Rifle Division that has been coming up to kind of reinforce this area. So the 44th gets disrupted, and their plans are kind of messed up by this full retreat that is occurring with the rest of the Soviet forces.
Well, and again, as we've mentioned, they're trying to retreat on these logging roads too. So it is not a clean, easy retreat happening either.
Exactly. Some of them are fleeing across lakes. Some of them are going through the forest. It's a disorderly retreat back to the Soviet lines, back to Soviet territory. So between the 4th and the 8th of January of 1940, the Soviet 44th Rifle Division was isolated and destroyed using Finnish tactics that are known as moti. Now, this concept of moti, if we were to describe it to you, sounds very much like wolfpacking. You stay in these small, isolated units, you wait for the larger unit to break apart, and then you can get local numeric superiority. You engage, you wolfpack a small portion, destroy it, break apart again, and then wait or bait other small portions to break off of that main force until you break it apart completely and destroy it. And this worked very, very well here. I mean, the 44th Rifle Division was all but just absolutely destroyed, and a large amount of equipment was left between the original retreat and the destruction of the 44th. The Finns were able to get 43 tanks, 71 field guns, 260 trucks, 1,170 horses, and a lot of arms and weapons to boot, which was a big deal. Finland's a small country; it doesn't have a huge industrial base, and so getting this gear was a huge thing for them. In the whole course of the winter and the continuation war. So, to talk about the Finn advantages here for a second, the reasons why they were able to succeed against a much larger opponent, in this particular case, they had high mobility due to skis and sleds.
I love that they're ski troops so much.
Exactly. You had cross-country ski troops that were engaging here, and they were far more mobile. Again, you've got Soviet heavy vehicles that are confined to these logging roads, and then you've got these ski troops, these ski units that are able to maneuver wherever they want to. That's a huge advantage. There's
a Bond movie, and I don't remember which one it is, other than it's not one of the very good ones, where it starts with a fight happening on skis, and I remember watching it being like, that's ridiculous. That's just silly. And then finding out, oh my god, that actually happens.
Yeah.
That's a thing.
It's pretty cool. And again, in a country where a lot of people grow up on skis, they were good at it. They were very good at it. As we had mentioned before, the roads, if you are bisecting Finland to Oulu, are mostly logging trails. So this is confined, it's single file, it's very hard to maneuver, very hard to respond to an attack on any side, even the front. And so this was a huge disadvantage for the Soviets, massive advantage for the Finns. The Finns had a flexible strategy that was it wasn't just attacking the front lines, but it also involved things like attacking kitchens and disrupting the food train because, low morale was a huge thing for the Soviets here. And part of that was because the Finns, they didn't know where the Finns were going to attack. They were just everywhere. So that flexible strategy was huge. You couldn't predict what was going to happen next. There was a Soviet lack of good equipment for cold weather and for snow in particular. And the Finns had the exact opposite. They were well equipped for the snow in terms of camouflage, and they were well equipped for the freezing temperatures that they were experiencing at this time. So the Soviets, not prepared for that. Finns, very much prepared for that. Finns were also defending their home. This is a huge morale advantage. When you're in your home territory and you're like, if we don't win, we're going to lose. We are going to lose. A lot of the Soviet troops didn't know why they were in Finland. There was no clear political agenda that they were included in. They were just, okay, we're going here, and we're I guess, conquering this place, I suppose.
Let's do the thing.
So a clear objective, that clear moral objective was huge for the Finns. There was a Soviet counterintelligence failure as well because the Soviets were using phone lines for the majority of their communications. The Finns tapped the phone lines and then knew everything that the Soviets were going to do. That was an issue. And then simplicity. The Finn attacks were based on two very simple strategies. The first one was frontal attacks, like they did across the lakes, and eventually secured Suomussalmi, and then this moti strategy, which they had employed and were very well practiced in. And so between these two ideas, very simple ideas, and the flexible strategy that was given to local areas, the Finns were able to pull off a victory against a much larger force. Frederick would have been proud.
Oh yeah, this is a big Freddy tactic here.
For sure. So yeah, I think that's the really big bits on Suomi Salmi. Did you have anything else to add on that, Thumbs?
The thing I keep thinking about this is everything that the Soviets did wrong here is everything people do wrong when fighting Russia.
Yeah.
It's what went wrong with Napoleon, it's what went wrong with Hitler. It's anytime someone invades Russia, they underestimate the cold Russian winters, their supply lines get messed up, and they have to deal with kind of hit and run rural attacks. And so it amuses me, and I get why, but it amuses me that they just decided that those weren't going to be a problem in this one for some reason. They're like, no, it'll be fine. Like, historically, that's never been true.
And again, you have a relatively new command set here. You've got a lot of people who are in charge who haven't been in charge in this way before. Like, this is a relatively new country for all intents and purposes in terms of how it operates. And so a lot of these mistakes, I think, can be chalked up to just being new at the game, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's Suomi Salmi. We talked a little bit about how everything else in the episode kind of ties in there. And in terms of the episode, we were able to go over the advantages, opportunities, and misfortunes that can occur in war, and the reasons why you want to come to battle, the factors that you want on your side, and of course, the unintended issues that can arise. And then, of course, during this downtime, it's very similar to during the downtime that you experience during a winter campaign or the winter quarters. And there's a lot of good stuff you can do to keep your mind sharp and your body sharp during this time, renew your kit, and keep into contact with your people. And just make sure that your community stays alive and vibrant and is still there and healthy when you get back to it. And if you haven't had enough, if you're sitting there being like, I have not had enough of the art of wargaming, I need more, we've got an Instagram and Facebook where we're putting out our player profiles, little interesting tidbits in terms of the battle or the historical era we're talking about. And then, of course, the information on upcoming episodes and all that sort of thing. We've got a website.
TAOwargaming.com.
Yep, and that's where you can access our information, and a lot of our episodes are on there. Of course, you can also get to the other shows, the other Earworm site from there as well.
You can check out our show and any other show on the Earworm Network at earworm.com, which is EARVVYRM. You can check out us. You can check out me and my buddy Tyler on General Nerdery, where we talk about whatever nerdy thing comes to our mind. And you can check out Tyler and our friend Danny on Fried Squirms, where they talk about horror movies.
And also, if you're wanting to communicate with us, if you've got a player profile to submit to the show, if you've got questions, critiques, criticisms, oh yeah, please do. We would love to feature as many people as possible. I'm starting to run out at this point, so you guys gotta start sending me people, or else I'm going to start begging again. People
keep telling us we're not important. We're like, I've never met anyone not important. I'm going to quote Doctor Who here.
Heck, send one of your friends. If you don't think your friend would be upset by it, like submit your friend for it. If you've got somebody in your realm or who think is pretty cool, send their information to artofwargamingpodcast@gmail.com, and we'll get them on there. But also any things we missed in the show, anything we may have gotten wrong with pronunciation or definitions in other languages, or even just chat with us. We're always open for it. But yeah, I think for this week it has been Yaga Malark.
And I'm Thumbs.
Signing off.